Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. Thank you for joining me again today for part 2 of this very special multi-part episode. Back in October of 2022, 4 different agencies serving male abuse survivors, including Men Healing and Male Survivor, developed Male Survivor Awareness Day to coincide with the month of October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. While those agencies planned their own events, Drew Bua of Husband Material and I thought it would be good to set up our own live event with participation of the Husband Material membership, specifically its subgroup fellowship for abuse survivors. Fellowship members submitted poetry and other items to be shared, some live, some previously recorded, and some read by others. The event was co-hosted by myself and Dr. Doug Carpenter, author of Secret Shame, A Survivor's Guide to Understanding Male Sexual Abuse and Male Sexual Development. Doug shared all types of information and statistics as part of the event. The goal for this event, and the day in total, was to help non-survivors how to understand and work with survivors to help support them on their healing journeys. I am very proud to have helped organize this event and with the end result. We are planning a similar event for 2023. If you would like more information about this year's event, feel free to contact me at polarliveconsulting.com for more information. And now we continue with part 2 of HM's Male Survivor Awareness Day 2022. I got a few more of what you would like a non-survivor to know about being survivors. I've been thinking about how to respond to this question. I'm having a hard time putting my thoughts on this into words. The thing that keeps coming to mind is I think I want them to know that I am strong. However, I hear my counselor's voice in my head asking, do you want them to know that you are strong, or do you want to know that you are strong? Weakness or perceived weakness is a fear that I wrestle with daily. Another one, very short. Encourage us to live beyond being a survivor. Encourage us to live as overcomers, or as the scripture tells us, more than conquerors. And that's something that the survivor recovery community, Christian and secular, encourages to move from victim to survivor to thriver. Yeah. So you're thriving. You're not only just getting by, but you can thrive. And that's why if you are part of the paid Husband Material Academy, you have option of joining us on Thursdays for Thriving Thursdays support group. And that's a live coaching call on Zoom that I lead for abuse survivors. And we talk. That's where I got all these from, was from that Thriving Thursday group. And the support group, subgroup within the Husband Material. So let's see what else is next. Next, we have a live guest who would like to tell their story as well. We have Kevin Bolger, who is joining us. Kevin is a member of Husband Material, and Kevin is co-host of the No Longer Ashamed podcast that he hosts with, there's the logo right there, with Lori Hardy, who helped train me as a coach. And if you haven't noticed it, I've been a frequent panelist on their podcast, as has Doug. We've been on there several times, and they were the first place I told my story.
You were actually our first panelist, first guest.
Yes, your very first guest, episode 10. And all those are, if you go to my profile within Husband Material and check on links, there's a Linktree page. Click on that, and that's all of my podcast appearances, including all the appearances I've been on Kevin's podcast.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here, and I'm thanking everyone who participated, especially those who tell their stories. I know how much courage that takes, and I just want to honor you guys. And I thank you for your attention. And I would like to just share my story really quickly and then introduce the podcast as well. Um, I am a survivor. I was abused at a very young age, and it is actually my first memory. My first childhood memory was that abuse, and so that's basically when my memory began, was that abuse. And then that lasted for months. Was an older family member that was the perpetrator, and then when I was 11 or 12, I was abused by an older girl. She was the older sister of one of my friends. And I was set up by my friend. You know, the whole thing was planned. I still don't have much memory of that incident. I just have fallout from it and had fallout for a while. And so I kind of fit the mold as far as coming forward with my abuse. It took me when I was probably in my late 20s to finally come forward. And I don't know that I ever would have, except one of my friend's sisters came forward about being abused. And my friend wasn't sure if she believed her. She thought maybe she was trying to be dramatic and, get attention. But I told her I believed her because I had also been abused and I had never shared it with anyone. One of the questions she had was, why didn't she tell anyone? And that's often a question we get as survivors when we come forward. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you talk about it? Why did you wait so long? And that's a really difficult question for a survivor, because often we don't know the answer other than we were ashamed to talk about it, or we were told, we were groomed that we would be in trouble if we talked about it. There's so many ways that we are groomed by the perpetrators that we believe them. So I came forward and went through years of intensive therapy, group therapy, and got to a better place. But I had a lot of issues from being abused, mainly just my methods of coping weren't very healthy. They were generally drugs and alcohol and other ways of just dulling the pain. Finally, got healthy and engaged to my wife, and I wanted to have my entire family there at the wedding. So I had to realize that the perpetrator was going to be there if I was inviting everyone. And I didn't know how that was going to happen, because I had to set up boundaries with the perpetrator. I couldn't have him in my life, so to speak. I had to protect myself from him, because whenever I was around him, I would have fallout. I would disassociate. I would have depression and also resort to drugs or alcohol to just numb myself afterwards. So up until that point, I had really avoided that person in my life, but I wanted my whole family to be at my wedding. So I was praying to God for help and for guidance. And one day at church, the sermon was about forgiveness, and I realized I needed to forgive him. And I had not at that point. I had no intention of ever forgiving him. I think part of it was I felt power in holding on to the pain that he had caused me. And so I thought by not forgiving him, I was holding power over him. But the sermon was convincing that I needed to forgive him. I needed to do that not for his sake, but for my sake, for my own health. And I think that's something that we misunderstand about forgiving, is that it's not for the person we're forgiving so much as for our own self. Because when we hold on to unforgiveness, we are holding on to that bitterness in our life, and it eats away at our life. It eats away at our emotions and how we treat people, and we can be ruining our lives with unforgiveness. So I was able to forgive him with God's help. And I think it was just kept praying for him for forgiveness. And I got to a point where he was very sick right before the wedding, and I started praying to God for his healing. And that's when I realized that I had forgiven him. And I realized that I was going to be able to see him. So that is my story. Recently, we did a podcast 2 years ago, and I started it just to give people voices for their abuse and to be able to tell their stories, because I believe telling your story is so important, and being able to share it and to honor what we have been through. And that's why I have the podcast, No Longer Ashamed, that Mike has been on, and Doug, and we've had over 20 guests now.
Right. I love that backstory. And talking about the power of story, that not only is it healing for the person telling the story, but it empowers other men and women to tell their stories and to look at their stuff, and inspires healing. When I hear other people's story, I learn so much on how to navigate my own healing. And by me sharing my story, it passes it along.
I think that's why, for me, the group therapy was so important, because there were other men, all different backgrounds, all different ages, and we all had different stories, but we also had many of the same issues. And to know that I wasn't alone, but was going through this with them, strengthened me to know that, yes, these things happen, and yes, this causes certain issues, but you can address those issues, and you can become a whole person. And that's why we do the podcast. We talk about all the different, we talk about many of the different issues, and also how they affect us and how we can get through them. We're all about healing and hope in our podcast.
Yes.
A couple of things I wanted to point out was, Kevin, you talked about forgiveness, and we're definitely not on here preaching at people that, you need to forgive your perpetrator. I think that in time you do, but you have to be ready to do that. And I think all three of us would agree on that. You have to be ready to forgive them. And a couple of things I want to say is that forgiveness is not an event. It's typically a process. Yes. And you may have to tell yourself that you're going to forgive this person multiple times. You may have to wake up every day and say, I'm going to choose today to forgive this person. It's not an event. It's a process.
It's like that whole concept of 70 times 7.
Yeah.
I know for me, it's been so true, but as more and more stuff that my father did comes out, then it's like, more stuff I need to forgive him for. So it's even that more stuff gets uncovered as you heal.
I wrote this in the chat, but I heard a couple of weeks ago this phrase, and maybe those of you, maybe you've heard this before. It was new to me, but holding on to unforgiveness is like setting yourself on fire, hoping the person that you're angry at will die of smoke inhalation. I loved that. I thought that is so true.
That's good. Yeah.
Holding on to unforgiveness is it's destroying you. It's not destroying that other person. So do it for you. Just like in the very last chapter of my book, I think it's chapter 24 or something, I talk about being ready to confront your perpetrator. That's another area where you have to do that for you, not for them. It doesn't matter if they deny it. It doesn't matter if they say it didn't happen. You are finding your voice and saying saying it out loud for yourself. It was just like Kevin was talking, the power of your testimony, the power of telling your story adds and brings so much healing.
Yeah.
I also wanted to add, for forgiveness, it does not have to mean reconciliation. In my case, it did, but often they're completely separate, and forgiveness is for your sake, not necessarily theirs. And it doesn't mean you have to reconcile with the perpetrator and,
there may be times where it's not appropriate for you to reconcile.
Yeah, there might be times where it's dangerous
Nor does it remove the responsibility if they did an illegal act. It does not relieve them of paying any penalties for that.
Yes, forgiveness is not forgetting.
Right.
Yes, forgive and forget is not in the Bible. It's actually Shakespeare. So if you didn't know that, that's where that came from. And the Bible says forgive and forget. No, it does not.
Right.
So thank you, Kevin. I'm going to put you back as an attendee, and we're going to be moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for sharing with us, Kevin. And let's see where we are next. I've got another what non-survivors should know. It's shame. For me, it was always shame. I couldn't speak of my experience to anyone ever. And since it's so prevalent, I really could have. 20% of the men I've known knew something about what I know, but we were all in secrecy. I didn't want pity, just understanding, and I didn't find it unless it was with others who were resigned to the lies that it instills in us and were acting out with me. It's a self-perpetuating lie, and it could be dealt with by openness. I would want non-survivors to know that many people around them are living in secret shame. The title of Doug's book. Living in secret shame, and that is not something to fear, that they can live in the same space with survivors and find grace for everyone. If they are willing to be present with people who have been hurt like this and not look at them as contagious, diseased creatures to be avoided, but human beings who have been hurt and need understanding and friendship.
I will tell you that I carried shame for many, 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 many years. And it even interfered with my ability to say that I had been abused, because my abuser asked my permission before he did what he did to me. He said, "Can I do this to you? Or can I show you something?" is what he said to me. I want to show you something that feels good. Can I do it? And I said, yes.
Yes.
And that yes has reverberated through my mind for years and held so much shame. And it didn't let me admit that I was sexually abused because I gave him permission to abuse me.
Yes, grooming, very much. So sly and so sneaky what they do with that, making it seem like it's okay that, it's just a secret between the two of us. It's just a game we're playing.
Yeah. Mine was like, hey, I do this thing to myself and it feels really good. Yeah. And I want to do it to you. Can I do it to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Very sly, seductive. Children cannot consent.
Right.
Children under the age of 18 cannot consent. So it's all abuse. Next, we have a poem. Roger submitted 2 poems. I'm separating them out. We're going to play one first. Let me get that set up.
My name is Roger. This is a poem I wrote at work a long time ago when I was starting my recovery. It's called I Feel Different. There is a thing that happens when I listen in the lounge. Sometimes when things are slow here, I run in there to scrounge. I often stop to listen to the chatter that abounds. I can't help feeling strangely as I listen with a frown. They talk of kids and shopping and of who is dating who. They grumble at the schedule and of all the work to do. Someone slipped a disc and someone else is getting fatter. It all seems so mundane that I can hardly stand the chatter. Off in my mind I wander to the triggers that I fight. memories that assail me when I close my eyes at night, smells that seem to bring on all the fear and icky feelings, the times I fight so hard just to stop staring at the ceiling. My legs sometimes get shaky and I strain to keep them clear. My eyes get hard to focus and it's sometimes hard to hear. The thoughts that go through my head so fast there's no place for caffeine. I smile and nod my head as if I'm present in this scene. I deal with so much crap each day with home and work and life. Sometimes I want to run away and hide from all the strife. Instead, I go to bed each night and pray for better days and wake up in the dark, hoping to cope in better ways. I stand and sip my coffee as I listen to their banter, wishing I was one of them, my biggest need just laughter. A joke, a little gossip just to kill the time away, nothing heavy to disturb the mundane pace this way. But I am nothing like them, all my issues seem so grave. It's hard for me to make so light. I try, but then I cave. I end up in the corner, silent, watching them behave, as though they had no care at all, so happily they rave. Although I know deep down inside they have their struggles too, wrestling with their own demons, perhaps that much is true. And yet it is so hard accepting that I'm just like them, because I feel so sick and bad from things I did with him. Thank you.
I think his poem really speaks to the shame that people hold.
Right. Yes, definitely. And let's see. What are we doing next? I've got a few more of what should non-survivors know. For me, it would be for them to understand and have patience for the colossal effort it takes to trust. The natural trust of a child was the first thing to go. Hypervigilance. Although I trusted God to save me when I was 12, I didn't trust him enough to talk about this. I was afraid if I did, he might reject me. It affected everything, and I felt fundamentally flawed. It took a lifetime to become desperate enough to take a leap of faith, to talk to anyone about this, and to talk to God about it for the first time. Trusting people is still hard. It takes a conscious effort. I think that makes me seem aloof, which is not an endearing trait. Second one, same kind of theme. Well, my experience left me with huge trust issues with men. In my life, men were only after one thing, and that imprinted on me heavily, that all men wanted to use me for sex. Undoing that false belief system took years, and in some ways, I'm still getting healing in that area. I noticed that as a common theme in the responses that has been, it will take time to earn trust. Well, the one man who made such a life-changing impact also is the one that assured me that only death would keep him from his commitment to me as a brother and friend. And then he disappeared. I need to know I am safe. I resonate with that a lot. Serial monogamy best friends. So I'll have one best friend and I'll spend all my time and energy on that one person to build trust and relationship. And then after several years, life happens, they move, and then it takes me a couple of years. Okay, next one, next best friend. Okay, then they move, and then the next, it takes time, and it's so frustrating. Now, I've got a few I have trust with, and that helps. So it's not just relying on one person, but it took time, and then I can see how devastating that is. I feel that devastation. I know what that feels like. Doug, want to respond?
I can see that so many men have trust issues in relationships, not only friendships, but also romantic relationships.
Right.
Of really being able to trust their heart and their bodies to another person.
Right. That goes back to the asexual part. I know a lot of survivors, Christian and not, who they're in long-term committed relationships but choose to be asexual.
Yeah. And that's where I've worked with people in the past, learning how to separate abuse from intimacy.
Right.
They are two totally different things.
Right.
But they get enmeshed in our minds, and we have to unenmesh them for healing to happen.
Exactly. And we have another, this is from Daniel Eichelberger, and he would like to share something as well. So Daniel, what would you like to share with us? What would you like non-survivors to know? Hey.
Thanks for the opportunity here. I want to talk about an aspect of being a survivor that some people may not think of. So I just wrote some thoughts down here, and I'll read those to you. A survivor's greatest fear is that they will not be believed. It is not enough to tell a survivor that you believe them. Your actions must prove it. It is helpful then to understand a survivor's reaction to abuse, so you will know not how to react, but how to respond to their needs. Childhood sexual abuse is the murder of innocence. We are grieving the loss of the child we were before abuse and the child that could have been had the abuse never occurred. In addition, we are trying to cope with the life-shattering realization that we were used to satisfy someone's animal passions, not because we were loved. We were warm bodies, useful only as long as our flesh was warm. The lies that propped up and justified the abuse and cemented our shame had defined our self-conception. Our childhood was a lie. It is no wonder that we experience continued grief. This grief that we feel is very similar to physical loss and bears all of the hallmarks of the so-called stages of grief: denial, anger, etc. It can be startling for non-survivors to see grown men wrestling with their pasts or revisiting events that happened decades before. If one sees childhood sexual abuse as a form of death, it can be a little easier to comprehend the depth of a survivor's feelings and the lingering aspects of their grief. Be careful of minimizing expectations. Expecting survivors to move on, keep it all together, or man up are not healthy or even human responses to the trauma of childhood sexual abuse. Well, what can you expect then? You can expect that the pain of survivors will often be recurrent. There will be times when our sense of loss is mitigated by the joys of the present. But it only takes a trigger, a flashback, a memory, a smell, to bring the stabbing pain back. Survivors are faced with a lifetime of processing grief. Don't be afraid that we are somehow regressing if we hit a rough patch. We need healthy relationships with other men who are willing to listen to us without trying to fix us. We need men who are strong enough to bear our emotions. This is a challenge because we live in a culture where men are not adept at emotional connection. Grief is messy, and men aren't supposed to be emotionally needy or messy. Do not be alarmed when a survivor calls on you for emotional support. We aren't really asking more from you than your empathy and your ear. We need your time and understanding. These are the most basic gifts that one person can give to another. Grief over what was and could have been. This is the constant companion of survivors. By allowing us to express our grief, by giving us your time and patient understanding, you will have given us the gift of humanity and the strength to heal.
Thank you very much for that. That was very powerful.
Very, very. Thank you, Daniel.
I think, Daniel, you bring out some very important things for people who have not been abused. The greatest tool that you have is your ears and your empathy, your ears and your heart. Just be willing to listen and express empathy. And that in and of itself can be so healing to another person, and just help them feel validated, accepted, and that someone is present with you.
Right.
It's just like Daniel said, it's not about fixing. You can't fix this.
Amen.
Right.
But you can be present with me. You can sit with me.
Right. I love what you said about just get over it. Why can't you just get over it? I've had someone in a recovery group get frustrated with me. Why aren't you just getting over it? It's a process. It's a long process. And new stuff just keeps coming up too as I heal. So there's more stuff I need to deal with. So yeah, it's a long, very messy process. I like the thing I read earlier about the scars. It should never look like nothing. It will look like a scar that may not hurt anymore, but the scar is there.
Yes.
But it never looks like nothing.
Right.
And that's so profound. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you for being willing to share. Please join us next time as we conclude with part 3 of HM's Male Survivor Awareness Day 2022. I'll see you then. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.